The committee will come to order. Good morning, and thank you all for joining today's hearing entitled "The Danger China Poses to American Agriculture." After brief opening remarks, members will receive testimony from our witnesses today, and then the hearing will be open to questions. Traditionally, we don't do questions with our panels of our colleagues. But I know Governor Noem was interested in taking a few questions. Time-wise, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do 5 minutes, full 5-minute round with the governor. And the second panel will be 5 minutes questions as normal. So good morning, and thanks to all for being here for a timely and necessary conversation about threats China poses to American agriculture. The People's Republic of China, governed by the Chinese Communist Party, which is where this threat comes from. It doesn't come from individuals. This is imposed basically where we're looking at links to the Chinese Communist Party, has gone out of its way to reduce its reliance on American agriculture, all while aggressively pursuing tactics that threaten our nation's ability to feed itself. Now, these threats are multifaceted, strategic, incendiary, and require a coordinated and a proactive response. These last few years have seen China steal U.S. intellectual property, hack critical cybersecurity and related infrastructure, weaponize agricultural trade, and acquire American farmland at an alarming rate. Each of these disrupt our national security, our rural communities, and our resiliency. Now, China has long used its legal and regulatory system to steal intellectual property, and we have seen this in everything from semiconductors to seeds. Not to mention the scale and the sophistication by which China can manipulate critical infrastructure has exposed vulnerabilities in American technologies. Now, this interference has ranged from data breaches and theft of agricultural research to ramping up disruptions of irrigation and transportation systems. In 2022, Chairman Comer and I, with more than 125 of our Republican colleagues, asked the Government Accountability Office to evaluate foreign investments in U.S. farmland and its impact on national security, trade, and food security. As many of you know, in 2021, the Department of Agriculture estimated that foreign investments in U.S. agriculture land grew to nearly 40 million acres. A few months ago, we received the final report, which showed Congress where gaps exist in our reporting framework and how better and more timely coordination between federal agencies could help increase visibility into potential national security risks related to foreign investment. Congress took a natural first step with the recent passage of the Consolidated Appropriations Act, where the bill addressed foreign ownership of land by improving the tracking system of it. The fact China imports almost as much food as the U.S. exports to the whole world makes this conversation more difficult. In recent years, the U.S. has seen record export values to China for soybeans, corn, beef, chicken meat, tree nuts, and sorghum, all of which are major contributors to our domestic farm economy, underscoring the importance of expanded market access and market diversity elsewhere. So, how do we strike the balance, protecting our producers and consumers in every piece of agriculture value chain while keeping pace with China's needs? How do we reduce our reliance on one country without undermining the necessity of a strong export market? How do we think smartly about policies that mitigate threats while protecting our best assets? Today's witnesses come to the table with lived experience and decades of knowledge on China and these very questions. Now, I welcome each of you and look forward to the discussion. With that, I now like to welcome the distinguished ranking member, the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Scott, for any opening remarks he would like to make.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, the purpose of today's hearing is to discuss the influence that China has on American agriculture. But unfortunately, some of the rhetoric surrounding this topic may derail us from tackling the real issues at hand and may contribute, hopefully not, but may contribute to violence against Asian Americans. And I want all Americans to know that we on the Agriculture Committee condemn all bigotry, including race-motivated threats and acts of violence. This is about agriculture policy, not people policy. I also want us to keep in mind that China is an important trading partner to the United States, and we need a thorough and policy-heavy conversation so that we can help the American farmers and our agricultural system navigate this difficult, challenging, and somewhat thorny issue. I hope everyone here today will engage in a serious, fact-minded, fact-based conversation and avoid fear-mongering and alarmism. Though I'm told that this isn't the topic of this hearing, I am also pleased that the recently enacted Agriculture Appropriations Bill will help USDA update its outdated system of tracking foreign agricultural land ownership in the United States of America. And if we are going to have a serious discussion about foreign influence on American agriculture, we must remember that China is our largest trade partner, accounting for $33.7 billion in U.S. agricultural exports just last fiscal year alone. American farmers are the most efficient and productive, and because of this, we produce far more than we Americans can consume. My colleagues will often note that we are in an agricultural trade deficit right now. And I'm here to tell you that alienating our trade partners will only deepen that deficit. American farmers need large markets to export their products. And when those markets are lost, who does it harm? Our farmers, and then the American people. We saw the implications of this when the Trump administration started a trade war with China, creating chaos and undermining markets for our American farmers. And since the trade war shut American farmers out of China, guess what? Brazilian farmers have filled that gap, increasing their exports to China as our market share decrease. Now Trump is calling for a 60% tariff on all Chinese goods. This would have drastic impacts on American agricultural production. It would increase costs for consumers and would almost certainly lead to devastating retaliatory tariffs placed on the U.S. agriculture exports. So I think it's fair to think that the U.S., being so dependent on a single export market, who is also a strategic competitor, raises and poses a risk for our American farmers. And one way that we can address this concern is to expand trade in existing markets while we open new markets. And I continue to support increasing the market access program. That's the way to go. And foreign market development program in the Farm Bill. And I believe that this new trade deal are critical for our American agriculture. However, there are many places where I am very critical of the Chinese government. The theft of seed and other agricultural technology is highly concerning to me and continues to be a problem. Market distortion through domestic price support programs and ignoring WTO decisions hinders access, and creates an uneven playing field for U.S. farmers. And I also remain highly critical of any foreign government seeking to buy American land near essential intelligence or our military installations. This is now a major national security. We must protect our national security interests. This is a national security issue of soaring magnitude to this nation. We got to protect our farmland and not get it in the hands of foreign interests, particularly China. I look forward to hearing from our witness chairman today and coming out of this hearing with an improved understanding of our relationship with China and how we can work together to protect America's agriculture interests. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. The chair would request other members submit their opening statements for the record, so our witnesses may begin their testimony. And to ensure that there is ample time for questions, pleased to recognize our colleague, the gentleman from South Dakota, Mr. Dusty Johnson, to introduce our first witness today.
You know, Mr. Chairman, governing a nation should be a team sport. Unfortunately, there are a lot of free agents in politics, people who don't understand the value of shared vision and shared efforts. Luckily, our speaker this morning, my friend, my governor, she knows how to work together. She understands that we get a lot more done when the federal government and the state governments are trying to find a path forward together. I would tell you, I don't think there's a month that goes by that she isn't showing the kind of leadership necessary to be able to have our team work with her team, whether it's protecting American farmland from the Chinese Communist Party, getting TikTok off government devices, making sure that her state pension program has the flexibility to divest from CCP influences, making sure that the Farm Bill priorities are right, managing the Black Hills National Forest in an appropriate way, protecting Mount Rushmore. I could go on for an hour, sir, and I know you don't want me to, of the ways that our speaker and I have been able to work together. And so I just got to tell you, I'm honored to be able to have a real South Dakotan, a real leader, and a real partner come on back to the Ag Committee and share some wisdom with us. Mr. Chairman, the governor of the great state of South Dakota, Kristi Noem.
I thank the gentleman and welcome Governor Noem. Our second witness is our esteemed colleague, the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Mike Gallagher, who is the chairman of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. And Congressman, thanks for joining us. Hopefully our third witness today, and I know he has some scheduling conflicts initially here, so we're hoping he'll be able to join us in time to offer his perspective, is another respected colleague of mine, of ours, somebody I work with on many issues, including career and technical education. The gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Krishnamoorthi, who is the ranking member of the Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party. Thank you to all our witnesses for joining us today. We will now proceed to your testimony. You each have 5 minutes. The timer is in front of you. We'll count down to 0, at which time your time has expired. Governor Noem, please begin when you're ready.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's an honor to be with all of you today, and thank you, Congressman, for that very kind introduction. You are a wonderful friend, and you're doing such a great job, maybe because you stole half of my staff and kept them when I left the Hill. No, but you're a wonderful representative for South Dakota. Thank you for caring so passionately for all of our people. You know, Chairman Thompson, I also have the honor of having one of my former chairmen on this committee sit in front of me today. Chairman Lucas was my chairman as I served here in the House of Representatives and had the chance to do 2 farm bills, but serving under his leadership on this committee was a special honor for me, and I loved being a member of his team as we put together farm policy, which I always refer to as food policy for the United States of America. So it's wonderful to see you again, Chairman Lucas, and I look forward to continuing to receive your advice and wisdom over the years. Ranking Member Scott and members of the committee, thank you so much for letting me be here with you today to discuss this topic. As a former member of this committee, I know it very well, that each day that you protect not only our nation's food supply, but you also are stewards of our land. And it is a treasure for us to be able to do that each and every day. I come before you today and sit as the 33rd governor of South Dakota. My home state is known for its gorgeous Black Hills, its rolling plains, but also iconic Mount Rushmore. We have a lot to be proud of, and if you haven't come to visit us, you probably should, because it is beautiful. Agriculture is our #1 industry in our state, but tourism is our second largest industry. It's incredibly important to our people that our land stay in good shape and we continue to produce. This year is special to me because this is the 30th year that I have worked on agriculture policy. I have spent my lifetime working on policy, not just being a farmer and a rancher and raising my family on the land, but also being involved in meetings. At just the age of 22, my dad was killed in an accident on our family farm, and I got angry when I found out how our family was going to be hit tragically by the death tax. I started showing up at meetings to talk about policy and how it impacted small farms. At that time, the U.S. Senate Majority Leader was Tom Daschle, who was a Democrat. And I ended up him appointing me to serve on the Farm Service Agency State Committee, which is the committee that oversees all the federal farm programs in the state of South Dakota. I did that for many years as a young wife and mother, and also as a farmer and rancher running a large operation in our state. So I was heavily involved in the implementation of federal farm programs in our state, making sure they worked for all of our ranchers there and that they were as flexible as possible to give them the freedom to choose how they ran their farms and to do it very well. I also served on many different commissions and task forces out here in Washington, D.C. during those years to help disadvantaged farmers, people that were in tough situations and different critical situations. And as the general manager of our business operations, I ran our farm for many decades. I was first elected to our state legislature in 2006 and became the assistant majority leader in the House. While there, I rewrote our agriculture property tax system. I ended up running for Congress, was elected, served on this committee, and we worked on 2 farm bills while I served on this committee, also served on natural resources, on the Armed Services Committee, Education and Workforce Committee, and then ended on Ways and Means Committee when we did tax reform, and was very proud to see that signed into law. In 2018, when I ran for governor in our state, and I won and then was reelected again last year, or in 2022, and I'm in my second term now. I tell you all of this because I think it's important for you to know that my heart is with the land and it is with our people, but when it comes to policy, that I know what I'm talking about. And I know it because I live it. Today, our focus of this committee is the danger that China poses to American agriculture. Over the years, I have witnessed this hostile communist country work to systematically take over our food supply chain. They have decades ago started buying our fertilizer companies, controlling our ability to access fertilizer, bring it into the United States. Then I watched them buy up our chemical companies as I worked on implementation of programs and policies at our state level and at the federal level. I watched us as we sold citizenship to Chinese communist members of the Communist Party for investment into our processing systems. And now most of our processing facilities are owned by the Communist Party or Chinese government. Now they are coming for our land. And when they buy up our land, they will complete their chain of control of our food supply. Between 2010 and 2020, the Chinese Communist Party's holdings of ag land increased by 5,300%. Reports now show that China owns about 384,000 acres of U.S. ag land, valued at over $2 billion. This should be alarming to all of us. USDA admits that this may not even account for all of the land that they own because there's very little track of foreign interests that are involved in these large transactions. In fact, there's very little reporting that happens at the state or the federal level, and little consequences for allowing countries who hate us from owning our land. Just this past summer, we had members of the Communist Party contact our state government and want to come and visit to our processing facilities, see our farms, and visit South Dakota. We declined all of those meetings, but just within days we received a phone call from the State Department telling us that those were Chinese spies. They were there to steal our intellectual property, to steal our genetics, and wanted to debrief us if we had met with them. Thank God we did not. We were told they were there to help improve our trade relations, that they were there to improve our business and our exports, and instead they were there to steal from the United States of America. So the threat is very real to us every single day, what China is doing, and they have a 1,000-year plan to become the world dominating power in the world, and the only thing standing in their way is America. Just this past summer, it was very clear to me when those Chinese spies were in our state that China wants to control us, and they want to do that by controlling our food supply. The Chinese Communist Party is not our friend. They're not our partner, and they're not our ally. They're our enemy. And they're a rapidly expanding national security threat that can't be ignored. So let me be clear. They are buying up our entire food supply chain, and when America can't feed itself and we rely on other members of another country to feed us, it becomes a national security issue. The country that feeds us will control us. And let me remind you why we do a farm bill every year. And I'm well aware that you have a priority to get that done, and I'm looking forward to getting a farm bill done, because that is the safety net for our farmers out there. In the past, the farm bill has always been a bipartisan issue, and it should continue to be a bipartisan issue. I had the opportunity to work on 2 of them, and it is simply a safety net for our farmers. It is important, and America decided years ago that we needed to have a farm bill to ensure that every family in this country had a safe and had an affordable food supply, that they had the ability to go to a grocery store and to put food on the table for their families, and that if a farmer had a good year, he could pay his bills, but if he had a bad year, he could lose everything. And we didn't want to have a drought or a flood or something happen that caused us to lose all of our small family farms and allow us to lose the ability to feed ourselves. Every family in this country recognizes the importance of a farm bill. I know you do too, and I'm looking forward to you getting one completed to make sure that we continue to feed ourselves in this country. The farm bill should be designed to help farmers and not environmental extremists. I hope that you'll continue to focus on making sure that we are working as a conservationist myself. I'm committed to protecting the abundance of our natural resources in my state, but so-called climate-smart agriculture dictated by the Biden administration does not help farmers, and it does not help us put food on the table or conserve our natural resources. We want wildlife habitat solutions that meets the needs of the people and the states that best serve this country and our ability to feed ourselves and protect ourselves. The Farm Bill manages risk, and it is a safety net, and I hope that you can get that done. Recent media reports show that the largest Chinese holder of American ag land is shipping food and medical supplies to China to be stockpiled by the Chinese military. We all saw when China purchased land in North Dakota that they claimed was for a corn processing plant, that there wasn't going to be enough corn in that area to supply that plant, and that it was just miles from a military installation. They were purchasing that land on purpose for national security reasons, and that is why I've made it a priority in my state to ensure that that doesn't happen on my watch. In South Dakota, we worked for 2 years to make sure that we had a bill in place that would make sure we know who's buying our land and that it wasn't going to be from a country that hated us. China would never allow us to go to their country and buy land in their country. They don't even allow their own people to buy their land. There's no reason we should allow them to come into our country and buy our land, and especially not close to our military installations. South Dakota is the home to Ellsworth Air Force Base. It's the home of the B-1 bomber that has protected this country for the last 50 years. It's also home to the MQ-9 Reaper drones, which are in operation protecting us as well. But it will be the first home of the B-21s, which will be the bombing platform that will protect this country for the next 50 years. And it's incredibly important that we stop China and that we make sure other evil foreign governments don't come in and have the opportunity to buy up land next to these military installations. When we talk about food policy, please talk about it from a national security standpoint. It is important that we grow our own food, that we produce it here, and that we're doing it in a way that protects the United States of America. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I will yield back.
Very good. Well, thank you. Thank you, Governor. Now, please recognize Chairman Gallagher. Begin when you're ready.
Thank you, Chairman Thompson, Ranking Member Scott, members of the committee. What an incredible opportunity to be able to discuss the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party in general, but to American agriculture in particular. I want to thank the governor for her leadership in really sounding the alarm about this threat, and also for carrying the burden of dealing with Dusty Johnson before he leaves the room. He may not technically weigh that much, but that's a heavy burden. And I believe he is from your Dakota. I always get it confused. A year ago, a gentleman named Xiang Hitao, a PRC national, pled guilty to conspiracy to commit economic espionage and was sentenced to more than 2 years in prison for stealing intellectual property from his employer, which was a Monsanto subsidiary. Xiang took copies of the algorithm on a one-way flight back to China, where he later worked for the Chinese Academy of Sciences Institute of Soil Science. So here you have an example of someone stealing American technology and bringing it directly back to the Chinese Communist Party. which reflects the CCP's approach to agriculture and food security, in that it's not just about economic competition. To quote General Secretary Xi Jinping himself, it is a national security issue of extreme importance. The PRC is the largest importer of corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, and dairy products in the world. The CCP views food security as an existential issue. Xi understands that if China were to invade Taiwan, it would be subject to blockade and economic sanctions, and therefore the PRC would face massive challenges in feeding its population. So to put it bluntly, the Chinese Communist Party is actively engaged in economic warfare against the United States, and our agriculture sector is already a prime target. The governor mentioned the share of U.S. farmland owned by Chinese-linked firms increasing more than fivefold between 2010 and 2021. These are only the acquisitions that we know about. There could be much more because, as you all know, the federal oversight system for reporting foreign ownership is alarmingly lax, and enforcement is very minimal. For example, the governor referenced the issue with the Fufeng Group, which attempted to purchase land close to Grand Forks Air Force Base in the other Dakota in 2021. They did not report the purchase to USDA until the U.S. media started asking questions about it. That's unacceptable. If you look more broadly at the entire CFIUS process, at least 3 problems emerge. 1, the U.S. government has no way of tracking land purchases by foreign adversaries. There was a recent GAO report that found USDA is incapable of properly tracking such land purchases by problematic actors. Second, even upon discovering a problematic transaction, CFIUS often finds it has no jurisdiction, despite the fact that in the FIRMA bill, we tried to give CFIUS said jurisdiction. So just as happened with the Fufeng acquisition, because the Air Force Base in question was not listed as a sensitive site by CFIUS, CFIUS claimed they had no authority to even review the transaction. That's unacceptable. And third and finally, CFIUS can't review greenfield investments in our farmland or consider our domestic food security as a risk factor. So our foreign adversaries are able to purchase thousands of acres of our farmland, and CFIUS can't even consider the potential impact on our food supply. This strikes me as something that Democrats and Republicans could come together right now in this Congress and solve by passing something like the Protecting U.S. Farmland and Sensitive Sites from Foreign Adversaries Act. I know there are members of this committee on both sides of the aisle. Ms. Slotkin and I have worked very productively on this issue. This is something we can get done even in divided government. Give CFIUS the authorities and resources it needs to make sure that our foremost adversary can't buy land near critical infrastructure and military bases. It should be a no-brainer. I would also suggest we can do better in protecting our agricultural IP by passing bills like the Biosecure Act, which my ranking member, Krishnamoorthi, is a co-sponsor of. This would ensure that U.S. taxpayer dollars don't go to CCP-backed firms like Beijing Genomics Institute that want to collect the genetic sequences of plants and animals from American farmers. And on the flip side, we should protect our food security for generations to come by cataloging the genetic sequences of U.S. plants and animals that we need to help American families, keep American families fed. So in closing, I would just say I spent a lot of my time as chairman of the Select Committee on China asking why any of this matters. Why are you having this hearing? Why do we care about the threat posed by the Chinese Communist Party? And it's not just that they're stealing our intellectual property or trying to dominate our food supply. I really do think, and I don't think this is alarmism, I think this is a recognition of reality if you read what Xi Jinping is saying to the party and to his people. I believe that the CCP is preparing for a war with the United States. There's no doubt they would prefer the fruits of war without the actual costs. That is to be sure. But they are preparing nonetheless. And he has told us repeatedly that he is prepared to use force if necessary to achieve his lifelong ambition, which is, of course, taking Taiwan, thereby dominating the region, and ultimately displacing the United States as the most powerful country in the world. So if we want to avoid that outcome, which would be a terrible outcome, a war with China would be horrific if you've ever participated in a war game. And I know there's many on this committee that serve that understand the costs of war. We have to abide by the old adage. If we want peace, we must prepare for war. And that is the challenge, to mobilize our colleagues and our constituents to do difficult, costly, but important things that put us on a path to deterring war. Thank you for having this important hearing, and thank you for letting me go a little bit longer.
Hey, Chairman, thank you so much. Thanks for your leadership and your testimony. And I know you have a hearing to get to, so feel free to.
I could imagine what Raj would say if he were here, if you'd like me to. Happy, we've spent so much time together, I feel like I can
There you
finish the
go. Well,
sentence.
C-SPAN is covering this hearing. You'll be able to hear them time delayed.
All right, thank
here
you
in
so
the
much.
future. No, thank you. We are going to take an opportunity while Mr. Krishnamoorthi is at another hearing right now on his way. And so we're going to take 2 questions from each side of the dais here for the governor, who's been more than generous with her time. And so first, I'm going to recognize Mr. Lucas from Oklahoma for 5 minutes questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Governor, it's good to see you back in this room again. I think we'd both agree that a strong, healthy, vibrant rural America and production agriculture is the key to our national security. But I serve in a body now where memories are short. And I'd like to go back 10 years ago to when you and I worked together, that 2.5-year struggle, as you remember, to create the 3rd generation Farm Bill. And maybe memories have numbed with time, but not just the way you conducted yourself in this committee on behalf of your constituents, but in those Republican conference committee meetings where we together battled diligently to get the attention of elected leadership about the importance of these farm bills. I will forever be eternally grateful for you backing me up in the way you handled the speaker and the floor leader on behalf of rural America and production agriculture. So thank you
Well,
for that tenacity, which I suspect is only grown stronger with time in your role as governor.
well, sir, you keep lighting people on fire and they get a little tougher. And understand that what you all say and matters, and what you do matters. The words you use have consequences, and it matters who's in leadership. So I have gone at times in my different roles, recognize that leadership needs to sit and listen to people and have conversations. We've become a country that has become addicted to being offended by each other. And therefore, we love to be offended by something that somebody has said, and I would just ask that we start listening to each other. The Farm Bill should be bipartisan. It should be bipartisan, that we be able to put a safety net out there, and I'm asking you to do it for the consideration of our food policy. It is, if we think a pandemic was scary, can you imagine what happens if we can't feed our people? We are only 3 meals away from a crisis. And I've recognized and noticed as governor, as the CEO of my state, how much control China has, not just over manipulating our currency, stealing our IP, things we've known forever, that even my pension funds, I can't even get Vanguard to say that China's not an emerging market anymore. Everybody in the world will agree that they're not an emerging market. They should give me an ability to invest in a fund that doesn't have China if I don't want to do that as a governor, for my people to get them the best returns possible. But now when I look at our food supply system and our processing system, and we recognize that China's not our ally, yes, we do trade with them. And when we do trade, and I worked on trade agreements when I served on the Ways and Means Committee, I had the ability to notice that when we did trade agreements, we created friendlier neighborhoods. But we can't do that if we're not talking to each other and having conversations. So that Farm Bill, even though I picked a lot of fights with my own fellow Republicans, we got them done. And we're going to have to challenge both members of both parties to come back to the table to make sure we have that safety net so we continue to feed our families.
And thank goodness for that tenacity you demonstrated then and continue to demonstrate. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now, please recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes questions.
Thank you very much, Governor. How are you?
I'm doing good. Good to see
And
you
it's
again.
good to have you with us. But tell me this, what is your opinion of Trump's proposal for a 60% tariff on all Chinese imports? And are your farmers ready to face the potential consequences of this?
I think that is a proposal that people are still looking at and having conversations about, and that's a great conversation for you to continue to have as well with the Republican members here as well, to weigh in to make sure we get the best policy in place. Because policy is what matters, and the debate and the discussion is incredibly important. You made a comment in your opening statement, Ranking Member Scott, that you talked about the fact that we were here to talk about ag policy, not about people policy. And for me, I would say that all ag policy is people policy. That what you do on this committee is is people policy. It's about feeding people. It's about the programs that take care of needy folks that need to have that kind of help. It's also about making sure we have many farmers out on our land and that we have that safety net there. So you have an incredible opportunity to do something here in this committee that's not happening anywhere else on Capitol Hill. And I hope you catch that vision. Nobody really cared, I would say, years ago that much about a little state called South Dakota. We get one member of the House. When I came here as a congresswoman, I didn't get a delegation. I was all by myself. So I became friends with everybody, Republicans or Democrats, because if I wanted to get stuff done, I could. We were the first state to ban TikTok, and after that, dozens of states banned TikTok because of the threat that it is. We also.
Okay, Governor, I got one more question
Yes, sir.
for you in my short time. If you listen to my opening statement, I hope you understand how concerned I am about foreign governments coming in and buying up our land, especially our farmland. Food makes the Agriculture Committee the most powerful committee up here in Congress because you can do without a lot of things, but the one thing we cannot do without is food.
Right.
And I'm concerned about the China impact, especially in buying up this farmland. And when you correlate that with the number of immigrants coming into this country from China, that's a long way to walk. And they ain't walking to get to Mexico or South America to get in those trips where they're coming across our border. I got to wonder about that, and I want to ask you, how much land in South Dakota have gone to foreign interests? And I want you to know that I agree with you. This is a national security of high monumental interest, and we've got to get to the bottom of it. How is your state reacting to the buying up of land by foreign governments, particularly China, in your state?
Well, sir, that was the question that I had when I became governor. And what I found is we had a law in the books that prevented foreign evil governments from buying our land, but there was no reporting mechanism and there was no consequences. So therefore, we didn't know who owned our land, who owned our investment. We couldn't determine that because nobody was reporting it. And then if we did find that there was somebody purchasing land that was a country such as North Korea, Iran, Russia, China, Venezuela, Cuba, there was no reporting, therefore we didn't know, and there would be no consequences if we did find out. So last year to my legislature, I brought a bill that would have allowed me to create a CFIUS board at the state level. That's really what I wanted to have in place, was that the states had the opportunity to have a CFIUS board that reviewed those transactions and then put forward consequences to make sure that it was done closer to the people and that we had more accountability and we're truly looking at real estate transactions and putting that in place. That bill did not pass, and what we ended up passing this year was a bill that added reporting mechanisms to the law we already had with consequences forcing the sale of that land. So now I will know when we have a bill in the books that has those two components we need to know to really truly get the answer.
But there are foreign interests that are buying land in South Dakota?
I believe that there are countries that own land that are friendly to the United States. I do not know if there are unfriendly ones that are buying ag land right now. I do know that some of our biggest processing facilities are owned by China. I mean, Smithfield Foods processes in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, my largest city, and they are Chinese owned. And they have been difficult for me to work with. So.
Well, I want to thank you, Chairman, for having this hearing because I truly believe that food is now a national security issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ranking Member.
I thank the gentleman. We're going to have two additional questions for the governor, and then we're going to get testimony from my good friend from Illinois. My son and daughter-in-law is congressman,
Oh, good.
Mr. Krishnamoorthi. So I'm going to yield to Congressman Austin Scott, and that'll be followed by Congresswoman Slotkin. Mr. Scott, you have 5 minutes for questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm going to get a little technical in this, but the reason that it is so important for us to be aggressive with China on the ag issue is that this is a basic necessity. We're not talking about toys. We're talking about the chemicals that it takes for our food supply. We're talking about the technology in our seed supply. And U.S. companies, less than 10 years ago, were 80% of the global seed supply. And today, we're about 30% of the global seed supply. And so when you allow countries like China, through companies like Syngenta, to become one of the largest seed suppliers in the world and the largest chemical supplier in the world, I might add, then you are putting one of your basic daily needs at risk, which is your food supply. And so, Governor, I want to commend you for being aggressive with that. I think that it is way past time we be aggressive with China. They are not an economic competitor anymore. They are an adversary, and you know we have to acknowledge that. And if tariffs are what it takes to bring manufacturing back not just to the United States and to the Western Hemisphere, then that's just part of what it's going to take for us to have self-control over our basic necessities. You were here during the last Farm Bill. One of the big discussions that we have asked for help for and not been able to get it from many of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle is an increase in reference prices. As you've talked with your farmers and your producers out there, can you tell me what you're hearing from them about the increase in input cost and the need for an increase in reference prices so that they have a safety net as we push forward?
If you don't address the increase in reference prices and don't bring them up to where they should be, there is no safety net. So just as far as doing these programs and making sure that you're making adjustments to all the programs and the components that are a part of a farm bill, that's one of the very most important things you can do to manage risk. And I want you to remember what farmers do every year. And for those of you that aren't farmers, they literally go to a bank and they borrow money to buy land. Then they borrow more money to go buy a tractor and a corn planter. And then they go back and they get an operating note so that they can buy their seed, their fertilizer, their chemical, and then they put it in the dirt. And they hope that maybe it'll rain and something will grow, and that months later they'll be able to go back and pick something up and harvest enough so that they can pay their bills. They're some of the biggest gamblers that I know in the world because they bury millions of dollars in the dirt, and they're taking a chance because they really truly do believe that producing food is a world need and it's a need that America needs to have. So at least give them a safety net, because it's not just the fact that they operate on faith and that they operate heavily leveraged. That's why they can have 1 year that's a drought and lose their entire operation, was because of the risk that they take. But increasing those reference prices is critical to them to give them a safety net that even works and functions to get them through a situation like that. And that's why I've always talked about the Farm Bill as our national food policy. It's because we decided as a country it was important that we always feed ourselves, that we don't depend on another country to feed us. And therefore, it does us good to have a much more competitive and affordable food supply if there's a lot of farmers out here, and that it's a safe and an affordable one because we have a farm bill and we have a safety net program to ensure that they stay on the land.
Well, let me say thank you for your testimony. I appreciate you and the type of member that you were when you were here, and the governor you've been. I would finish with this, Mr. Chairman. I think the last call I got was not actually from a farmer, it was from a banker.
Yeah.
And his response was, I don't think that there's a commodity that we grow in the state of Georgia where our farmers can make a profit this year at the current prices with the input costs where they are. So I yield back, and I appreciate you.
Gentleman yields back. Now recognize Congresswoman Slotkin for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Governor, for being here. I want to, reiterate and support, I think, what you've seen on a bipartisan basis, which is food security is national security. I'm a former CIA officer. There are 2 of us on this committee, and that's my entire sort of lens with which I look through this. We should always be able to feed ourselves by ourselves. And you're right, during COVID, my family's in the hot dog business. And during COVID, we were concerned with the meat processing plants going down with COVID that, Americans don't know what it's like to walk into a store and see no protein on the shelves, and the panic that would create and the concern that would create. I also live on my family farm. I guess just to pick up on a thread that Representative Gallagher mentioned, this idea of having farmland purchases go through what's called the CFIUS process. And I think again, I see it as a federal issue because based on your example, right, where the intelligence community, the full weight of our sort of insider information that we may have on a company, on individuals, on their intentions, does reside within the federal government. I respect your attempt to do one at the state level, but just like you were about to meet with a bunch of businessmen and the State Department came in and said, we've got real issues with them, that resides at the federal government level. So there's a bunch of bipartisan bills on putting all purchases of farmland, not just farmland adjacent to a military base, adjacent to a sensitive site, but all farmland to go through that CFIUS process and let our intelligence community tell us whether this is a risk or not. Last week, myself and Congressman Blake Moore from Utah, Republican, went a step further, and I'd ask you to think about this. And we said, it's not just farmland. If you have a company coming in building a big manufacturing site, I'm from Michigan, right? If you have a company coming in to do a huge purchase of our infrastructure, like hog slaughter, right? You should be putting that through that same intelligence community process to help us understand if that's a strategic threat to us. And I think we all are trying to solve the same problem, which is how do we make sure that nations that could be real adversaries potentially down the road are not able to purchase major infrastructure and assets in the United States. But we have to make distinction. We can't hit it with a giant, club. Biggest purchasers of farmland in Michigan are Canada and Holland. I'm not real stressed about the Canadians who are my neighbors. I used to go there to drink when drinking age was 19. I'm not real stressed about the Canadians buying land in the state of Michigan. It has to be limited, tailored. But I do think it's an area of bipartisan cooperation. We have to do that without demonizing people from China who are living under this government that I bet they really, really don't like. We want the best and brightest from China to want to be students here and stay here and build their lives here, as opposed to take information back to China. So that's my one ask is let's have a real policy conversation. Let's do it on a bipartisan basis. We have the will here, but let's also in the process not demonize all human beings with a giant brush in a way, again, as you mentioned, where leaders set the tone. So that's that, but I agree with you on many, many things on this. Would ask you to think about taking it one step further from just farmland to the big infrastructure that we know that they're interested in purchasing here with connections to the Chinese Communist Party.
Well, and that would be something that obviously we've had a lot of conversations about in South Dakota, because I am alarmed at that. Because the next question is, well, what about commercial property? What about, I mean, it's not that they haven't been conducting nefarious activities from smaller tracts of land, and where does this stop? We should all be analyzing it. That's why I proposed a CFIUS model at the state level, is because I get the privilege and I get the opportunity to be solely focused on South Dakota. So I know what's going on there better than I think someone does that doesn't live in South Dakota and lives all the way across the country. And it's no offense to the federal government, but it is very rare that you guys fix anything. And a lot of times when we're doing something, I'm doing it in South Dakota or another governor's doing it, and you're taking that as a model then and using it. And frankly, the Constitution of the United States gives us states rights and a lot more opportunities to lead than what it grants to the federal government. So by giving us the opportunity for me to fight for my people and to bring policies forward, it gives other states the chance to do that, and the federal government follows in place. I would use TikTok as an example. By us leading, by banning TikTok on government devices, dozens of states followed our lead. Then the federal government came in and recognized the threat that TikTok was and how it was collecting data and spying on us and being used to study the American people and figure out how to continue to steal our information. So, I would think let the states be incubators of using what our Constitution intended us to be on possible models like this, that then the federal government as well can proliferate and move forward and do things right. I'm much more nimble than the federal government is.
I thank the gentlelady, and I thank the governor.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Thank you so much for
Honor and a privilege.
taking the time, the expense to come and to spend some time with us, and your leadership on this issue is much appreciated. So at this point, you're excused, and I'm going to recognize my good friend from Illinois, who is the vice chair or the ranking member of the Select Committee on China, Mr. Raja Krishnamoorthi, for his 5-minute testimony. Congressman, go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Scott. Thank you to the committee for inviting me to speak today. Ag has always been a cornerstone of the U.S.-China relationship, and Chairman Gallagher and I worked closely with our members on the Ag Committee on this important issue. In August 2023, the chairman and I traveled to Dysart, a small town in Iowa. In 2011, not very far from Dysart, a farmer saw a man digging in the cornfields. After some investigation, authorities discovered that this man was not just digging for fun. He was looking for proprietary corn seeds to send back to his employer, a Chinese seed corn company. The man eventually tried to ship 250 pounds of corn seeds to Hong Kong, disguised in Costco-sized packs of microwavable popcorn, just like this.
That's clever.
The total cost of this one case of IP theft was estimated to be $30 million because the folks in China wanted to reverse engineer the contents of this to be able to produce the same back in China. Ag technology is a prime target of IP theft because American technology and farming are the best and most productive in the world. The Select Committee's bipartisan economic report, released in December last year, included broad recommendations on how to best protect IP. For the ag sector, we need to continue to improve coordination between local and federal law enforcement agencies and properly resource and train the DOJ to prosecute these particular crimes. There are other ag-related concerns addressed in our economic report. Congresswoman Slotkin and Congresswoman Hinson have already transformed another economic report recommendation into the Securing American Ag Act, which will require the USDA to study the supply chains of our ag inputs, including vitamins, animal feed, and pesticides, where China has been increasingly dominating the market and crowding out American and other suppliers. As we continue to remain in an era of uncertainty in our trade relationship with China, we also need to better protect American farmers from retaliation by the CCP, including by diversifying ag export markets for American farmers. Now, I know this committee has been looking at the issue of land sales. There are legitimate concerns with certain land purchases by CCP-affiliated entities, especially close to sensitive and military sites. However, as we address these problems, we have to make sure that the cure is not worse than the disease. Some purported solutions have had very real and harmful effects on the Asian American community as well. Dozens of bills across the country, for instance, target Chinese nationals regardless of whether they are affiliated with the CCP and regardless of the proximity of their land acquisitions to sensitive sites. Florida, for example, passed SB 264, a law that prohibits Chinese nationals from purchasing real property in the state. This law had a serious negative impact on the Asian American community. I'll just give you one example. There's the case of Ziming Zhu, a political asylee living in Florida who was persecuted by the CCP and who fled to the United States. He was beginning to rebuild his life in Florida. Since the passage of SB 264, Mr. Zhu was forced to cancel the contract for the purchase of what was otherwise going to be his new home in his new country. The lesson here is very clear. When land purchase bills target individuals who are merely Chinese immigrants, they often target those outside of the intended audience. The Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund filed a lawsuit against this particular Florida law on equal protection grounds. Laws like SB 264 are neither fair nor justified. And in the early 20th century, states passed similar alien land laws in more than a dozen other states prohibiting Chinese and Japanese immigrants from becoming landowners. Those policies severely restricted economic opportunities and exacerbated discrimination, and every single one of those laws were repealed one by one by one in all of those states. So please, as you consider these land purchase laws, let's be careful. You folks don't want to pursue policies that discriminate against anybody. So in that spirit, let's be careful not to adopt or to encourage those types of policies. Chairman Thompson and Ranking Member Scott, thank you again for this very special opportunity to testify before this very distinguished committee. The Select Committee very much looks forward to working with your committee in the future, and I thank you again.
Well, Congressman Krishnamoorthi, thank you so much for your testimony. I know that this is a busy day for all of us, including you. You've been bouncing from hearings, and so we're going to excuse you from the panel as well. But thank you for joining us. Thank you for your leadership and for sharing with us this morning. Much appreciated.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take just a brief break to no more than 5 minutes recess to allow our first panel witnesses to depart, and our second panel witnesses to take their seats, and then we will reconvene. So we'll reconvene basically as soon as our witnesses get comfortably seated here and ready to go.